The August sun of 1873 beat mercilessly down on the small town of Liberty, Missouri. Heat rose from the dusty ground like invisible waves, making the air shimmer before the eyes. At the Thornton farm, 5 miles from town, the afternoon silence was broken by the cruel crack of a whip. Elias Washington, a 67-year-old black man, was tied to the punishment stake that Jeremiah Thornton kept in the center of his yard. His back already showed red welts that contrasted with his dark, weathered skin. The farmer, a burly man with a graying beard and eyes cold as ice, gripped the whip with steady hands. "You stole from me, old man," Thornton shouted, raising the whip again. "2 chickens. 2 of my best laying hens." "Mr. Thornton, I swear to God I didn't take no chickens," Elias groaned, his voice hoarse with pain. "I got family to feed, but I ain't no thief." The whip came down again, drawing a muffled cry from the elderly man. Several farm workers watched from a distance, their faces marked by helplessness and fear. Since the end of the Civil War 8 years earlier, little had changed in this part of Missouri. Men like Thornton continued treating former slaves as property. "Liar." Thornton spat on the ground. "Found feathers in your shack. Feathers from my chickens." Mary Washington, Elias's daughter, ran toward the yard when she heard her father's screams. Her eyes filled with tears at the sight. She was a young woman, only 23, who worked as a laundress in town. She fell to her knees before Thornton. "Please, sir, stop," she begged. "My father has a weak heart. You're gonna kill him." Thornton shoved her violently, sending her sprawling in the dusty ground. "Shut your mouth, girl. Your daddy's a thief and he's gonna learn to respect other folks' property." The whip cracked again. This time, Elias fainted, his body hanging limply from the ropes that bound him to the stake. Thornton laughed with satisfaction, wiping sweat from his brow. "Leave him there till nightfall," he ordered the workers. "Let it be a lesson to all of you." Meanwhile, about 20 miles away, Jesse Woodson James rode with his men through the hills of Clay County. The famous outlaw, now 26 years old, had become a living legend in the West. His blue eyes scanned the horizon as his horse trotted along the dusty road. "Jesse," said Frank James, his older brother, riding up alongside. "Cole Younger says there's good money in the Liberty Bank. We could take a look." Jesse didn't respond immediately. Something in the air felt different that afternoon. A tension he knew well, the same he'd felt before every confrontation during the war. His Confederate guerrilla instincts, honed by years of fighting, rarely betrayed him. "Let's head to town first," he finally said. "I want to know what's happening over there." They reached Liberty as the sun began to set. The town buzzed with hushed conversations. In the Missouri Belle saloon, Jesse and his men sat at a corner table, watching and listening. "It's a shame what that Thornton did," whispered a local merchant to his companion. "Whipping an old man like that. And over 2 chickens he wasn't even sure were stolen." "Old Elias is an honest man," the other replied. "Works hard since he was freed. Thornton just wanted to make an example." Jesse felt his blood boil. War memories flooded back, Union soldiers torturing Confederate prisoners, farmers being humiliated for their beliefs. But this was different. This was gratuitous cruelty against a defenseless man. Frank noticed the change in his brother's expression. "Jesse, what is it?" "Nothing that can't be fixed," Jesse murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Cole, you and the boys stay here. Frank, come with me. Let's take a look at this Thornton farm." Night fell over Missouri like a black shroud. Jesse and Frank rode in silence along the road leading to the farm. As they approached, they saw a solitary figure still tied to the stake in the yard. It was Elias, unconscious, his body swaying slightly in the night breeze. "Good Lord," Frank whispered. "The bastard left him out there all night." Jesse dismounted and ran to Elias. Carefully, he untied the ropes binding the old man. He was alive but barely breathing. His back was a map of open wounds. "Sir?" Elias opened his eyes with difficulty when Jesse supported him. "Who are you?" "A friend," Jesse replied simply. "Where does your family live?" In town. "My daughter Mary." Elias tried to stand, but his legs couldn't support him. Jesse carried him to his horse. "Frank, let's get him to town. But first." His eyes turned toward the big house, where lights still glowed in the windows. "First I'm gonna have a word with Mr. Thornton." Frank knew that tone in his brother's voice. It was the same tone Jesse used before his most decisive actions during the war. "Jesse, think carefully about what you're gonna do." "I already have," Jesse replied, helping Elias onto the horse. "Some men only understand one language. Before we continue, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. We love knowing where our viewers are from. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It truly helps us keep going. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Now enjoy the story. The Thornton house was a sturdy two-story structure, with wide porches and white columns that reflected the moonlight. Jeremiah Thornton sat in his leather armchair in the parlor, savoring a glass of whiskey and counting coins he'd taken from his safe. His wife, Margaret, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, embroidered silently by the fireplace. "It was a good day," Thornton murmured, smiling with satisfaction. "I hope that old Negro learned his lesson." Margaret looked up from her needlework. "Jeremiah, don't you think it was a bit excessive? The man's old enough to be your father." Thornton slammed his fist on the side table, spilling whiskey. "Excessive? Margaret, if we don't show firmness, they'll think they can do whatever they please. These people need to know their place." "But what if he dies? The authorities?" "The authorities know damn well who runs this county," Thornton interrupted. "Sheriff Morrison's been a friend for years. And Judge Henderson owes my family plenty of favors." That's when they heard the sound of horse hooves approaching. Thornton frowned and went to the window. 2 men were dismounting in front of the house, but the darkness prevented him from seeing their faces clearly. "Who could that be at this hour?" Margaret asked nervously. "Stay here." Thornton grabbed his shotgun from the wall rack. "I'll see what they want." He opened the front door and found himself facing 2 men dressed like common cowboys. The younger one, with dark hair and piercing eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton?" Jesse asked, removing his hat politely. "That's me. What do you boys want on my property at this hour?" "My name is Jesse James," Jesse said simply, watching the farmer's reaction. "And I believe you and I need to have a talk." Thornton went pale. Even in this isolated part of Missouri, everyone knew the name Jesse James. The farmer gripped his shotgun tighter, but Jesse continued, speaking in a calm tone. "I came to return something you lost," Jesse continued. "A man. An old man you left tied up like an animal in your yard." "Elias Washington is my worker," Thornton stammered, trying to maintain his composure. "He stole from me and was punished accordingly." "It ain't your business." Jesse took another step toward the porch. "When an innocent man is tortured, it becomes any decent person's business, Mr. Thornton." "Innocent?" Thornton let out a nervous laugh. "I found chicken feathers in his shack." Frank James, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Chicken feathers? Did you ever stop to think that maybe someone planted those feathers there to frame the old man?" That's absurd." Thornton protested, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. Jesse climbed the porch steps slowly. "Mr. Thornton, during the war I saw a lot of cruelty. Saw good men die for their convictions. But I never saw anything as cowardly as a strong man torturing a defenseless old man. You can't threaten me in my own home." Thornton raised the shotgun, but his hands were shaking. "I'm not threatening anybody," Jesse replied calmly. "I'm just suggesting you reconsider your actions. Elias Washington is a free man, not your property." Margaret appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Jeremiah, do what he's asking." "Shut your mouth, woman," Thornton shouted, but the shotgun barrel kept wavering. Jesse noticed the growing tension. His hand moved instinctively toward the revolver on his belt, a subtle movement Frank recognized immediately. During the war, this gesture had preceded countless confrontations. "Mr. Thornton," Jesse said, his voice now colder, "you have a choice to make. You can keep being the kind of man who tortures innocents, or you can try to salvage what's left of your humanity." "I won't be intimidated by an outlaw." Thornton snarled, but sweat was pouring down his face. "I'm not the one doing the intimidating, sir," Jesse replied. "That's your own conscience." At that moment, Frank noticed movement in the shadows around the house. Some of the farm workers had approached, drawn by the sound of voices. Among them, Jesse recognized Mary Washington, Elias's daughter, accompanied by 2 black men who appeared to be her brothers. "Is my father all right?" Mary asked in a trembling voice. Jesse turned to her. "He's being cared for in town, miss. A doctor is tending to his wounds." Thornton took advantage of the momentary distraction and aimed the shotgun directly at Jesse. "Now all of you get off my property before I—" The gunshot echoed through the night. But it didn't come from Thornton's shotgun. Frank had drawn his revolver in one swift motion, shooting at the stock of the farmer's weapon, which flew from his hands and shattered on the porch floor. "The conversation ain't over yet, Mr. Thornton," Jesse said, his tone now cold as winter wind. Dawn brought a thin mist that stretched across the fields around the Thornton farm. Jesse had spent the night in town, making sure Elias Washington received proper medical care. Dr. Sullivan, an elderly physician with decades of experience, had examined the old man's wounds with growing gravity. This man was lucky to survive, the doctor told Jesse while cleaning the wounds. A few more lashes and his heart wouldn't have held out. Jesse watched Elias sleep on the small bed in the makeshift clinic. The old man's face, even in rest, showed deep lines of pain and suffering. Mary sat beside the bed, holding her father's hand. "Mr. James," she said quietly, "why did you help my father?" "Most folks just look the other way." Jesse considered the question for a moment. "During the war, I saw men die defending their principles. Your father didn't do nothing but try to live with dignity. That deserves defending." Frank entered the clinic with Cole Younger and 2 other gang members. "Jesse, we need to talk," Frank said, signaling with his eyes toward outside. They gathered on the clinic porch. Cole, a tall man with a thick mustache, looked worried. "Jesse, half the town's talking about last night. Thornton sent word to Sheriff Morrison." "So?" Jesse asked, seemingly unconcerned. "Morrison's known for being, let's say, understanding with farmers like Thornton," Frank explained. "He might try to form a posse to hunt us down." Jesse looked through the clinic window where Elias still slept. "Then we'll have to settle this before he gets the chance." "What you got in mind?" Cole asked, knowing that tone in Jesse's voice well. "A demonstration," Jesse replied simply. "Something Thornton and men like him will never forget." At that same moment at the Thornton farm, the farmer paced nervously through the parlor, a new shotgun in his hands. He'd spent the night sleepless, jumping at every sound. Margaret tried to convince him to leave for town, at least until the situation calmed down. "Jeremiah, you know this man's reputation," she said, packing some clothes in a suitcase. "He's not just any common outlaw. During the war, I know damn well who he is." Thornton interrupted. "But this is my land. I ain't gonna be run off my own property by some ex-Confederate guerrilla." One of the farm workers, a white man named Bill Turner, knocked on the door. "Mr. Thornton?" "Sheriff Morrison's coming with some men." Thornton felt momentary relief. Morrison was a fat, corrupt man, but he had legal authority. Surely he could deal with Jesse James. The sheriff entered with 4 deputies, all armed and looking serious. "Thornton, I heard Jesse James was here last night. He threatened me, Morrison. Invaded my property and threatened me." Morrison spat tobacco juice on the floor. "Well, that can't stand. Nobody, not even Jesse James, can intimidate respectable citizens in this county. So what you aim to do?" Thornton asked anxiously. "Gonna form a posse. We got enough men to capture his whole gang," Morrison replied, puffing out his chest. "They're probably still in town." But Jesse had already anticipated this reaction. While Morrison organized his men, Jesse and his gang positioned themselves strategically around the Thornton farm. It was a tactic they'd perfected during years of guerrilla warfare: surround the enemy when he least expected it. Around midday, when the sun was high and the heat was becoming oppressive, Jesse emerged alone from the tree line surrounding the property. He walked slowly toward the house, hands empty, but everyone knew he was deadly even unarmed. Thornton saw him from the window and shouted to Morrison, "There he is. He's coming alone." Morrison and his deputies stepped onto the porch, weapons drawn. "Jesse James," the sheriff yelled. "You're under arrest for trespassing and making threats." Jesse stopped about 20 yards from the house and removed his hat in a false show of respect. "Sheriff Morrison, I came here to settle a matter of justice. The only justice here will be you in jail." Morrison replied, but his voice betrayed nervousness. "Let me ask you a question, Sheriff," Jesse said, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "Did you investigate the charges against Elias Washington? Did you check whether he actually stole those chickens?" Morrison hesitated. That ain't important. Thornton has the right to discipline his workers." "His workers," Jesse repeated, a cold smile appearing on his face. "Sheriff, slavery ended 8 years ago. Elias Washington is a free man. He works for me," Thornton shouted from the porch. "And he stole from me." Jesse then did something unexpected. He whistled low, a sharp sound that echoed across the yard. Immediately, Frank and Cole emerged from the trees on both sides of the house, followed by other gang members. In seconds, Morrison and his men found themselves surrounded. "Now," Jesse said calmly, "let's have a civilized conversation about justice." The circle closed slowly around the Thornton house. Jesse James and his men moved with the precision of experienced predators, each knowing exactly his role in this deadly dance. Sheriff Morrison sweated profusely, his deputies gripping their weapons with trembling hands. "You're making a terrible mistake," Morrison stammered, trying to maintain some authority in his voice. "I'm the law in this county." Jesse walked closer, his blue eyes fixed on the sheriff. "The law, Sheriff Morrison? Where was the law when a 67-year-old man was whipped nearly to death? Where was justice when Elias Washington was tortured for a crime he never committed?" Frank James approached from the side, his revolver still holstered, but his hand resting casually on the grip. "Jesse, I found something interesting behind the property." He carried a small burlap sack. When he opened it, it revealed chicken feathers, but these weren't ordinary feathers. They were painted with a specific mark, a technique used by some farmers to identify their birds. "Mr. Thornton," Jesse called, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "Recognize these feathers?" Thornton descended from the porch slowly, his eyes wide. Where did you find those?" "In your foreman's chicken coop, Bill Turner," Frank replied. "Along with 2 live chickens that still had your marks." All eyes turned to Bill Turner, who had gone pale as paper. The man tried to back away, but Cole Younger was already behind him, blocking any escape route. "Bill?" Thornton whispered, incredulous. "You stole my chickens?" Turner finally broke under the pressure. I needed the money, Mr. Thornton. My wife's sick and the doctor costs dear. I thought if I put the feathers in the old Negro's shack." "You let an innocent man be tortured to hide your own crime," Jesse said, his voice cold as ice. The contained fury in his words made even the hardest men in his gang shiver. Thornton staggered as if he'd been punched in the gut. The reality of what he'd done began hitting him like successive waves. He had nearly killed an innocent man. He had tortured an old man for a crime he hadn't committed. I didn't know," Thornton murmured. "Good God, I didn't know. But you also didn't care to find out the truth, did you?" Jesse replied. "For you, it was easier to believe a black man was guilty than to investigate properly." Sheriff Morrison tried to regain some control of the situation. "All right, there was a mistake, but that doesn't justify." "Shut up, Morrison," Jesse interrupted. "You're just as guilty as Thornton. How many times have you ignored injustices like this? How many times have you turned a blind eye so men like Thornton could exercise their cruelty?" Jesse walked to the stake where Elias had been tied. The wood still showed marks from the ropes and stains of dried blood. He ran his hand over the rough surface, feeling the texture that had marked the old man's skin. "Mr. Thornton," Jesse said without turning around. "Come here." Thornton hesitated, but the firm gazes of Jesse's men made it clear there was no choice. He approached the stake with faltering steps. "This stake," Jesse continued, "was built to humiliate and torture. You use it to break the spirits of men you consider inferior." "Jesse," Frank intervened softly. "What are you thinking?" Jesse finally turned to face Thornton. The farmer saw something in the young outlaw's eyes that chilled him to the bone. It was the same coldness Jesse had developed during years of war, when death was a constant companion. "Justice," Jesse said simply. "True justice." He gestured to Cole Younger, who approached carrying a rope. "Mr. Thornton, do you believe in the law of retaliation? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." "Please," Thornton whispered, his legs nearly giving out. I can compensate the old man. I can pay for his medical care, I can—" "Money doesn't erase what you did," Jesse interrupted. "But maybe a lesson you'll never forget can prevent you from doing it again." Margaret Thornton appeared on the porch, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Mr. James. He was wrong, I know he was wrong, but he's my husband." Jesse looked at her for a long moment. He saw a woman who had lived years beside a cruel man, probably suffering her own humiliations in silence. He saw fear, but also something like relief, as if part of her knew this moment of reckoning had arrived inevitably. "Mrs. Thornton," Jesse said gently, "your husband nearly killed an innocent man. If I were as cruel as him, justice would have been done long ago." He turned again to Thornton. "But I'm not you. I don't find pleasure in others' suffering." Cole had already prepared the rope in a noose, and was passing it over the horizontal arm of the stake. The knot was perfectly calculated, strong enough to be lethal, but still allowing one last chance. "Mr. Thornton," Jesse said, his voice now taking on an almost ceremonial tone. "This stake was built by your hands to cause suffering. It's fitting that it should be the instrument of your own justice." Thornton fell to his knees. "Please, Jesse. I beg you." "Beg Elias Washington," Jesse replied. "Beg all the men you've humiliated at this stake. Sheriff Morrison tried one last appeal. "James, if you do this, every marshal in Missouri will come after you." Jesse laughed bitterly. "Sheriff, they've been coming after me for years. One more body won't make a difference." He gestured to Frank and Cole, who took Thornton by the arms and lifted him up. The farmer was shaking uncontrollably, muttering incoherent prayers. "Jeremiah Thornton," Jesse said, assuming the formal tone of a judge pronouncing sentence, "you are guilty of torturing an innocent man. You are guilty of using your position to exercise gratuitous cruelty. You are guilty of perpetuating the hatred that should have died with slavery." The rope was placed around Thornton's neck. The farmer looked up and saw the same stake he had used to torture Elias, now preparing to seal his own fate. "Last chance," Jesse said. "Do you have anything to say?" Thornton looked toward the house, where his wife watched in silence. Then he looked at his farm workers, many of whom had suffered his humiliations over the years. Finally he looked at Jesse James. I ask forgiveness," he whispered. "From God, from Elias Washington, and from all those I've hurt with my cruelty." Jesse studied the man's face for a long moment. He saw fear, yes, but also something that might be genuine remorse. During the war, he had learned to read men in their final moments. Some died as cowards, others with defiance, and a precious few with true repentance. "Forgiveness," Jesse said slowly, "doesn't come from me." And then in one quick and decisive movement he pulled the rope. Jeremiah Thornton's body swayed once in the afternoon breeze, then hung still. The stake that had been an instrument of so much suffering for others had finally fulfilled its final role. Jesse watched for a moment, then turned to Sheriff Morrison. "Sheriff, I suggest you think carefully before pursuing men who do what the law should do." Morrison didn't respond. He was staring fixedly at the swaying body, probably calculating how this would affect his own political position. Margaret Thornton slowly descended from the porch and approached her dead husband. She didn't cry. Instead, she simply stood there, looking up with an expression Jesse couldn't completely decipher. "Mrs. Thornton," Jesse said softly, "the farm is yours now. I suggest you run it with more wisdom than your husband did." She looked at him for a moment. "And if I can't?" Jesse mounted his horse, followed by his men. "Then I'll be back." They rode toward the sunset, leaving behind the stake of justice and the body of the man who had learned, too late, that cruelty always finds its way back to those who practice it. In the town of Liberty, Elias Washington awoke from his convalescence to discover that his pain had been avenged. When they told him what had happened, he just shook his head sadly. "Violence should never be the answer," he told his daughter Mary. "But sometimes when justice fails, other men have to do what's right." And at the Thornton farm, the stake remained standing for a few more days before Margaret ordered it torn down and burned. The flames consumed the blood-stained wood, but the lesson it had taught would echo through that region of Missouri for generations. Jesse James and his gang disappeared into the hills, but the story of their justice spread like wildfire. And though many questioned their methods, few questioned that on that hot August day in 1873, true justice had been done. The stake of redemption had fulfilled its final purpose, not as an instrument of cruelty, but as a symbol that even in the Wild West, where law often failed, there would always be men willing to do what was right, no matter the price.